Jeremy Utley. I'm here in Kim's garage office. We are excited to welcome you to Masters of Creativity from Stanford d.school. We're going to dive right into the content. Needless to say, it's a special day to get to be here with Kim Scott. We're excited to see all of you. And not only are we going to hear a little bit about her expertise in Radical Candor, but we're actually going to invite a handful of folks from the audience to come to the stage and join us for some Candor consultations, where Kim will help a couple of folks workshop an actual challenge they're facing, feedback that they need to give but aren't sure how. So it's going to be a highly interactive and exciting session. At the end, we'll make sure to share with you about upcoming events as well. So stick around to hear. We've got no small thanks to Kim Scott. We've got an amazing lineup of guest speakers who are booked through almost every week through June or July. So we're really excited to share upcoming speakers with you. But with that, I'll hand the floor over to Kim.
Awesome. So what I want to do today is talk to you all about a very simple idea. And if you can put this idea into practice, not only will it help you do the best work of your lives, it'll help you build the best relationships of your career. So this idea is radical candor. And I'm going to start by explaining it by telling you all a story about a moment when my boss criticized me. Not because radical candor is all about the boss criticizing the employee, but because these are the moments that we're nervous about. So we'll talk towards the end about the fact that it all starts with soliciting feedback, not giving it. So anyway, here's what happened. I had to give a presentation to the founders and the CEO of Google about how the AdSense business was doing, just a couple of months after I joined. And I walked into the room, and there in one corner of the room was one of the founders on an elliptical trainer wearing toe shoes and a bright blue spandex unitard. Not really what I was expecting to see, and not really what I wanted to see either. And there in the other corner of the room was the CEO, and he was doing his email, and he was so intent on his computer, it was like his brain had been plugged in the machine. So probably like all of you in such a situation, I felt a little bit nervous. How in the world was I supposed to get these people's attention? Luckily for me, the AdSense business was on fire. And when I said how many new customers we had added over the past couple of months, the CEO almost fell off his chair. And he said, "Why did you say this is incredible? Do you need more marketing dollars, more engineering resources?" So I'm feeling like the meeting's going all right. In fact, I now believe that I am a genius. And I walked out of the room. I walked past my boss. And I'm expecting a high five, a pat on the back. And instead she says, "Why don't you walk back to my office with me?" And I thought, oh, wow, I have screwed something up, and I'm sure I'm about to hear about it. And she began the conversation, not by telling me what I had done wrong, but what had gone well in the meeting, not in the kind of feedback sandwich. I think there's a less polite term for that. Are we allowed to curse on this webinar?
We can bleep later.
Okay. Not in the shit sandwich sense of the word, but really seeming to mean what she said. But of course, all I wanted to do was hear about what I had done wrong. Eventually, she said to me, "You said in there a lot. Were you aware of it?" And with this, I made a brush off gesture with my hand, because I figured it was no big deal. I had a tiger by the tail, and I was like, who cares? It's just a verbal tick. And then she said to me, "I know this great speech coach. I bet Google would pay for it." Still not getting the hint. I made another brush off gesture with my hand. I said, "I am busy. Didn't you hear about all those new customers? I don't have time for a speech coach." And then she stopped. She looked me right in the eye, and she said, "I can tell when you do that thing with your hand that I'm going to have to be a lot more direct with you. When you say every third word, it makes you sound stupid." Now she's got my full attention. And some people might say it was mean of her to say that I sounded stupid, but it was actually the kindest thing she could have done for me at that moment in my career. Because if she hadn't used just those words with me, and by the way, this is really important, she would never have used the words that she used with me with other people on her team who were perhaps a better listener than I am. But with me, those were the words she needed to use in order to get through to me. And if she hadn't, I never would have gone to see the speech coach, and I wouldn't have learned that she was not exaggerating. I literally said every third word. And this was news to me because I had been giving presentations my whole career. I had raised millions of dollars for 2 different startups giving presentations. I thought I was pretty good at it. And it was almost as though I suddenly realized I had been marching through my whole career with a big hunk of spinach between my teeth, and no one had had the common courtesy to tell me that it was there. And so it just got me to thinking about two things, really. One was, why had no one told me? And two, what was it about this boss that made it so seemingly easy for her to tell me? As I thought about her management style, I realized it really boiled down to two things. She cared about me not just as an employee, but as a human being. When I moved from New York to California to take the job, I didn't really know anyone out here, and I was lonely, and she could tell I was lonely. And so she introduced me to a book group. I'm still friends with a number of those people to this day. At the same time, it wasn't all sunshine and roses. I also knew, and this was reassuring, that if I screwed something up, she was going to tell me in a way that I would listen to her. And even if it might hurt my feelings in the short term, she was gonna overcome that discomfort and let me know about the things I was doing wrong so that I could fix them. Now, this hardly seems so radical that I would call it radical candor, caring and challenging. And yet I've never met a single person who doesn't struggle with feedback at work, at home, and in all aspects of their life. And I spent a couple of years at business school, not at Stanford, mind you, but at another business school. And I spent a summer at McKinsey. And in that period of time, I learned one important thing. All of life's hardest problems can be boiled down to a good 2x2 framework. So here is your radical candor framework, your radical candor 2x2. Care personally, challenge directly. First of all, let's think about what it means to care personally. This is what I think of as the give a damn dimension of radical candor. And I've worked with a lot of different people in my career, and I've never met a single person who says, I don't care about other people, so I'm going to be a great leader, a great colleague, a great employee. That's not really usually how it works. So what is it? I mean, there are psychopaths out there, but I've come across very few. So what is it that moves most of us down on the care personally dimension of radical candor? I think that the problem here begins when we're 18, 19, 20 years old, and we're right at that moment in our lives when our egos are maximally fragile and our personas are beginning to solidify. And right at that moment, someone comes along and says, be professional. And I think an awful lot of us translate that to mean, without even realizing what we're doing, we translate that to mean sort of leave your emotions, leave who you really are, leave your humanity, leave everything that's best about you at home and show up at work like some kind of robot. And you can't possibly care personally if you're showing up at work like some kind of robot. So you really want to make sure that you're creating an environment in which you can be more than just professional. I'm not saying be unprofessional, but we can be more than just professional. We can build real human relationships at work. Because I think a whole lot of what gives work meaning and what enables us to do the best work of our lives is when we really care about the people who we work with. Maybe we even love the people, not in the HR disaster, marriage destroying sense of the word that we read so much about today, but in the true collegiality sense of the word. However, unfortunately, love is not all you need. The Beatles got that wrong. You also need this other dimension of radical candor, the challenge directly dimension, which I think of as the willing to piss people off dimension. And the problem here begins not when we're 18 years old, but when we're 18 months old. And we have a parent or someone who says to us, if you don't have anything nice to say, don't say anything at all. And now all of a sudden, congratulations, it is your job to say it. And I would argue that when you really care about your colleagues, it's actually your obligation. And this is really hard. It's hard. Radical candor is hard because of this, the professional training, and also this sort of, if you don't have anything nice to say, don't say anything at all training that we've gotten since we were very young. So one of the things I've done to try to make it a little bit easier is to give words to what happens when we fail on one dimension or another. So sometimes we remember to challenge directly, but we forget to show that we care personally. And this I call obnoxious aggression. Now, in the first draft of Radical Candor, I called this the asshole quadrant because it seemed, I don't know, more radically candid. But I stopped doing that for a very important reason. I found that when I did that, people would use this this 2x2, and they would start writing names in boxes. And I beg of you, please don't use this framework that way. This is not another Myers-Briggs personality test. These are names for specific mistakes that each of us make probably on a daily basis. And a lot of the harm that happens with obnoxious aggression is kind of obvious. But one of the more subtle problems here is that, I don't know about you all, but when I find that I've acted like a jerk, it's not my instinct to go the right way on the care personally dimension. Instead, it's my instinct to go the wrong way on challenge directly and to say, oh, it doesn't matter, it's no big deal, but it does matter, and it is a big deal. That's why I talked about it in the first place. And then I'm on the hero's journey to manipulative insincerity, or the anti-hero's journey to manipulative insincerity. And this is where passive aggressive behavior, political behavior, all of the things that make a workplace sort of toxic creep in. And the thing about obnoxious aggression and manipulative insincerity is that it's fun to tell stories about them. If you watch The Office, you're going to see a lot of episodes about obnoxious aggression and manipulative insincerity, because this is where the drama comes in. But in my experience, the vast majority of us make the vast majority of our mistakes in this last quadrant, where we do remember to show that we care personally, because most people are actually pretty nice people, despite everything you notice on social media. But because we're so concerned about not hurting someone's feelings, we fail to tell them something they'd be better off knowing in the long run. And this I call ruinous empathy. And because this is the most common mistake, I want to kind of do a deep dive on ruinous empathy and share with you one of the most painful experiences of my career. I had just hired this guy, we'll call him Bob, and I really liked Bob a lot. He was smart, he was charming, he was funny. He would do stuff like, we were at a manager offsite, we were playing one of those endless get to know you games, and which nobody really wanted to be playing. We were a startup, we were busy, we were going to all be up all night. And Bob was a guy who had the courage to raise his hand and to say, look, I can tell everyone's really stressed, and I would love it if we could do something that'll be really quick and help us get to know each other. And I've got an idea. Whatever his idea was, if it was quick, we were down with it. And he said, let's just go around the table and confess what candy our parents used when potty training us. Really weird, but really fast. Weirder yet, we all remembered. And then for the next 10 months, every time there was a tense moment in a meeting, Bob would whip out just the right piece of candy for the right person at the right moment. So we all loved Bob. He was a little quirky, but he brought some levity to the office. One problem with Bob, he was doing terrible work. I was so puzzled because he had this incredible resume. I found out much later that the problem was that Bob was smoking pot 3 times a day in the bathroom, which maybe explained all that candy that he had at all times. But I didn't know any of that at the time. All I knew is that he was handing stuff into me and there was shame in his eyes. He knew he wasn't doing very good work. And I would say something to him along the lines of, oh, Bob, you're so smart. You're so awesome. Everybody loves working with you. This is a great start. Maybe you can make it just a little bit better. So let's double click on why I said something so banal to Bob. I think part of the reason was true ruinous empathy. I really did like Bob and I really didn't want to hurt his feelings. However, if I'm honest with myself, there was more than a little bit of manipulative insincerity going on there as well, because Bob was popular on the team. And Bob also was, he was sensitive. And I was afraid that if I told Bob in no uncertain terms that his work wasn't nearly good enough, that he would get upset. He might even start to cry. And then everyone would think I was a big you know what. And so this goes on for 10 months. And me not really being radically candid with Bob, but me being ruinously empathetic / manipulatively insincere with Bob. And eventually the inevitable happened. And I realized that if I didn't tell Bob in no uncertain terms that his work wasn't nearly good enough, in fact, if I didn't fire Bob, that I was going to lose all my best performers, because they were sick of their deliverables being late because his deliverables were late. They were sick of not being able to do their best work because they were having to spend so much time redoing his work, and they were going to go to a different company where they could do the best work of their lives. And so I sat down with Bob to explain to him where things stood And when I finished explaining it to him, he kind of pushed the chair back from the table. He looked me right in the eye and he said, "Why didn't you tell me?" And as that question was going around in my head with no good answer, he looked at me again and he said, "Why didn't anyone tell me? I thought you all cared about me." And now I realize by not telling Bob, I thought I was being nice, but now because I hadn't told him, he agrees with me. He has to leave the company. His reputation is just shot on the team. Not so nice after all. And it was one of the most painful moments of my career. But all I could do in that moment was make myself a very solemn promise that I would never make that mistake again, and that I would do everything in my power to help other people avoid making that mistake, because it is one of the most common mistakes that we make at work. And that is really why I came up with a framework, why I wrote the book, and why I'm here talking to all of you all today. So there's a subtlety to radical candor, which is the order of operations that I kind of alluded to in the beginning. These are some specific things you can do to put the ideas into practice. The first is you want to make sure you're soliciting it before you're giving it. You don't dish it out before you prove you can take it. The next thing is giving it. And remember, it's about praise and criticism. The next thing is you want to gauge how it's landing for the other person. Radical candor is not a monologue, it's a dialogue. And so you must remember, I'm going to say this a few times, radical candor gets measured not at your mouth, but at the other person's ear. And last but not least, you want to make sure that you're encouraging radical candor on a team. So let's quickly go through how does this work? You want to solicit radical candor. When is a good moment in your day to solicit radical candor? Because all of this that I'm talking about is really fast. These are all sort of 2-minute impromptu conversations, and it's free. You don't have to pay me anything to take this advice, but it does take enormous emotional discipline. So I hope to offer you a few tips that'll help with that. You want to solicit it, I think, if you have one-on-ones with people, you want to let them get through their agenda item first. The main goal of a one-on-one is to listen to the other person. But say 5 minutes at the end to solicit radical candor. And this is really important. I think sometimes people save up radical candor for their one-on-one to give it. Don't do that. Do that in the moment. We'll talk about that next. And definitely don't save up your radical candor for some kind of performance review. And don't give it before you get it. So there are 4 things I want you to remember. And if all of you can just take out a pen right now and do one thing, our time will be really well spent. Come up with your go-to question. What's the question you're going to ask? Because if you say, "Do you have any feedback for me?" you're wasting your breath. I can already tell you the answer. "Oh no, everything's fine." So you want to think of a way to ask the question that demands an answer. I will share the question that I like to ask, which is, what could I do or stop doing that would make it easier to work with me? But I was working with Krista Quarles when she was CEO of OpenTable, and she said, "I could never imagine those words coming out of my mouth. The way I like to ask is, tell me why I'm wrong." That's fine too. Think of how you're going to ask. Your next step is to embrace the discomfort. No matter how good your question is, the other person still does not want to answer it. So you got to close your mouth and count to 6. I only made it to 3 there, and I could tell Jeremy wanted to jump in and say something.
Purple flag
Yes,
moment.
no, it's
Purple
good.
flag.
It's good. That's the whole point of counting to 6, is that it's a long time. Almost no one can endure 6 seconds of silence. They're going to say something. So now, congratulations. You've dragged this poor soul out on a conversational limb they never wanted to go on. Your next step is to listen with the intent to understand, not to respond. And last but not least, to reward the candor. If you agree, fix the problem. If you disagree, which is going to happen sometimes, look for that 5 or 10% that you can agree with, and then have a respectful conversation about why you disagree. Very often, a good relationship begins with a respectful, healthy disagreement. So that's soliciting radical candor. Next, let's talk about giving it. Remember, it's more about praise than about criticism. I've gotten some feedback on that story that it leaves people with the impression that it's all about criticism. The art of radical candor is painting a picture of what's possible, and praise is a better tool for that than criticism. So you want to have these 2-minute impromptu conversations, and you want to be humble. You want to state your intention to be helpful. You want to offer this immediately. You want to have these conversations in person when possible, synchronously when it's not possible. You want to criticize in private, praise in public, and you don't want to give someone either praise or criticism about their personality. You want to use context, observation, result to make sure that you're offering feedback about things that the person can change. Now, no matter how good your prepared remarks are, or your impromptu remarks are, you don't know how they're going to land for the other person. So you've got to gauge it. I'm going to say it again. It gets measured not at your mouth, but at the other person's ear. So you want to make sure that you're paying attention to how they respond and that you're choosing the correct vector. What do I mean by choose the right vector? Start in a neutral place. Don't go all the way to the outer edge of challenge directly, and then pay attention to how they respond. I want to reassure you that most of the time this is going to go better than you think it will. However, some of the time, like maybe one time out of 10, you're going to get either the person being sad or mad or brushing off your feedback the way I did to my boss. So what do? If the person is sad, that's your cue to move up on the care personally dimension, not to zoom over to ruinous empathy. If the person is angry, once again, this is your cue to move up on care personally. Although if you're like me, it's probably your instinct either to get mad back and yell and wind up in obnoxious aggression, or to pull into your shell like a turtle and retreat to a self-protective, manipulative insincerity. What can you say? If the person is sad or mad, just acknowledge the emotion. Emotion is okay. It helps us communicate. You can ask what you could do that would be most helpful. And just, I beg of you, eliminate the phrase, don't take it personally, from your vocabularies. And talk to one another. You're meeting some new people in the Q&A. Like, find the person who you're going to ask, because this is real emotional labor. This can burn you out if you don't get help. Now, there are other times when the person will do to you what I did to my boss. They'll kind of brush off your feedback. This is your cue to move out further than you may be comfortable going on challenge directly. It's not your cue to zoom over to ruinous empathy or to talk badly. Say, I tried to tell Bob, but he wouldn't listen. It is your job to be clear enough to get through to the other person. So what can you do if someone's brushing off your feedback? I'm not sure how to interpret your reaction, but you want to take ownership for the communication. You don't want to say you are, responding badly. You want to say, you can take a page out of my boss's book. I can tell when you're doing that thing with your hand. I'm going to have to be a lot more direct or clear with you. You can say how you feel. I don't feel like I'm being heard. And there's a world of difference between saying that and you're not listening, right? So use the I pronouns, not the you. And bring in a bunch of examples and also talk to other people. Because again, this is really hard. You've worked up your courage to say this thing to this person and they're brushing you off. Last but not least, encourage it between others. This is where you get your real leverage. A couple of things you can do. You can share these ideas with your team. You can buy the book. An author always loves it when folks buy the book. You can illuminate the Radical Candor 2x2 with your stories. What's your story? What's your Bob story? And share that with other people. There are studies that show that our brains get on the same wavelength when we tell stories. And last but not least, if you're not a reader, you like TV a little better, we made a workplace comedy called The Feedback Loop. So this is a very different approach than is usually taken to feedback training. We'd love it if you check it out. And with that, I want to say thank you and stop sharing slides and start hearing some questions.
That's awesome. We've got so many amazing questions here, but before we dive into the questions, and thank you for asking them, we want to invite a special guest to the stage to conduct a candor conversation right now.
Awesome. Let's do it.
Hey, Kim. Loved it. Actually, it's really an honor to see you online. I'm sitting with your book. It's always on my desk. It's one of my favorite playbooks or Bibles, as I would say it. And so super excited to be here. And it's a great conversation. The question I had for you, Kim, is that you spoke about, reaching the other person's ear, but I also believe it's also important to reach the other person's heart.
Yes.
Especially in a virtual world where we don't see the person many times, and it's hard to gauge on the camera the body language. How do you give feedback with empathy? And do you have any tips on the virtual world versus the IRL world, which we were used to, that you have picked up during the pandemic? We all are going to be working in a hybrid environment, so it's going to be a combination of both. But I'd love to get your perspective and thoughts on that.
So it is, thank you so much, Ram, for asking that question. It's something that I've been giving, obviously, a lot of thought to since we entered the pandemic. And frankly, even pre-pandemic, often I was managing teams that were in 13 different countries. And so we weren't in the same place. A couple of things. You mentioned it's hard to interpret facial expressions and body language over in these little squares. And that's absolutely true. There's a lot of research. Adam Grant has been posting about this. There's a lot of research that indicates often we're better off having a phone call than a video call. And this is also, it's interesting. There are parallels to in real life, because I used to advise people, if you're going to have a conversation, sometimes it's better to take a walk together than to sit looking at each other. So one of the problems is that sitting face to face where we're looking at each other can feel antagonistic, actually, to folks. But when you're walking, you're going in the same direction. So sometimes if I think a conversation is going to be hard to have, I'll say, why don't we take a virtual walk together and talk on the phone? And there are several aspects to this. One is that even in real life, we misinterpret each other's facial expressions and body language. I think there's a lot of people who struggle with what I'll call resting bitch face, which doesn't mean they're angry, but other people interpret them as angry. And there's probably, I'm going to wave a purple flag. There's probably a gender neutral way to say that. And men struggle with it as well as women. So there's that problem. I had some questions and disagreements with Malcolm Gladwell's book, Talking to Strangers. But one of the things he pointed out is that we often really don't understand each other's emotional cues. And so I think it's important to remember that there may be more noise than signal in body language and facial expressions, even in real life. So that's why a phone call might be better. Another problem is when you're on a video call, when you're on Teams or Zoom or Hangout or whatever, I want to be agnostic to the platform, that none of us are as disciplined as we ought to be about turning off all the other notifications in. So sometimes we get distracted by other messages popping up. So that's one tip. Another tip, part of the reason that we jumped on here in the beginning and said, where are you? How you doing? I think getting in the habit of connecting at a human level before you offer your content is really important. When we were together in real life, we'd walk into the room. Some people would be early. We'd walk past people in the hallway and we would chit chat. And I think that is much harder now. And so being conscious of reserving the first few minutes of a meeting to actually chit chat with people can be great. Another thing that is really interesting is the ability to create random connections in larger groups. So if you have a meeting that's more than 10 people, if you're on Zoom, you can push people into Zoom rooms randomly. And this is actually incredibly efficient. At Google, they used to intentionally make the lunch lines long to prompt those kind of random interactions. At Apple, I'm sure they do something like this at Microsoft too. At Apple, they made the bathrooms far away, and so that people would have to walk by and bump into each, which annoyed me since I'm a frequent peer. But anyway, I think that there's a lot of things that we can do if we're more conscious of creating those moments of connection that used to kind of happen automatically. Lots more to say about this. It's a really important question.
No, but great perspective. Thank you so much, Kim. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Any tips that you've learned over the past couple of years? It's been a long time.
I think what you said, Kim, the water cooler moments are really important, and you got to find the virtual equivalent of those moments, right? They are difficult to get. One thing which I do is I start off every meeting with the amazing story of the week.
Yes.
And it could be anything. It could be something that you did with your family. So it's not related to work. And I think it just sets the mood to the meeting being a bit more positive, especially in these times when you see the news, you're seeing about war and it's all gloom and doom that happens. And so you want to kind of, especially in the peak of the pandemic, starting on a positive note with the amazing story of the week really helped me. But, some of your thoughts of walking one-on-one is something which I'm definitely going to implement, and it'll implement today. So I definitely want to try that.
Yeah. Thank you so much. I love that. I try to offer tips that you don't have to spend any time. You can just do it.
Thanks, Ram, for the awesome question. Hey, Kim, while we are seeing poll responses come in, a couple of folks have asked about the purple flag.
The purple flag.
Maybe you could mention or describe it so that folks know what it is just while we're waiting for folks. And if you haven't had a chance, if you see there's a poll going on your screen, we're putting it to the audience to determine which the next Candor conversation should be. So take a time to vote, and then Kim, purple flag, what's up with that?
So if you write a book about feedback, you're going to get a lot of it. And some of the feedback I got is that very often people offer what they believe to be radical candor, but what is actually bias or even prejudice or bullying. And so one of the things, this feedback is part of what prompted me to write my next book, Just Work. And one of the things that Trier Bryant, my co-founder, and I do is we work with teams to roll out bias interrupters, and we did a TED talk about this recently. We can drop that into the link. But the idea is that you come up with a way to interrupt bias in the moment, sort of a shared vocabulary. And so Trier and I use a purple flag, but other people use yo. Another team we're working with says bias alert. So whatever it is, there's no magic words that will make this less awkward. The best words are the words that your team will actually use. So that is one of the suggestions that we have is wave that purple flag.
I like that. Someone, by the way, just so you know, I'll put Kim on the spot just for fun. Someone mentioned a purple flag moment. They said people who smoke pot may have to do so for medicinal reasons,
yes.
Right. And so they said, hey, is that casting smoking weed in a negative light? I love, by the way, the fact that someone would feel free to share that because it speaks highly of the culture you've created in being willing to receive feedback.
Yes, thank you for that. And you are correct. There are a lot of people who use on various kinds of medication, and you want to make sure that you're creating an environment that is conducive to that. That was not what was going on with Bob.
It wasn't the case with Bob. But it's a great.
Although, one of the points that I often make when I tell that story is that part of the problem with Bob was that I was not soliciting feedback from him. Maybe I was doing something. Maybe he didn't have a medicinal reason, but maybe I was doing something that was frustrating him so much that was his response. So perhaps soliciting feedback would have been the way to start.
So Zhao, it looks like the question from Carnegie Mellon rose to the top. Would you mind to invite that person onto the stage if you could? And then I'll ask you, whenever Zhao invites you to the stage, I'll ask you to turn on your video as well, if you're able to, so we can see your face. And the question, just so everybody knows, I think hopefully you can see the poll results. Maybe it says, how can we help a team member that engages in toxic workplace behavior?
So I think the most important thing to do when and I'm gonna sort of use bullying as an example of toxic workplace behavior. One of the things I recommend in the face of bullying is a you question. What's going on for you here? And to ask the person, because maybe they're not sort of in the no asshole rule. Bob Sutton talks about the sort of constitutional assholes and then the temporary assholes. So very often also there are people who don't understand what's going on. There was one person I worked with who he tended to discourage his team and intimidate people around him, but he really didn't intend to. And so I was giving him feedback about this, and he kept kind of brushing it off. And I finally decided one day I was really going to have to get through to him. And so I brought in a bunch of examples. And when I got to about the fourth example, he clutched his head and he rocked back and forth and he said, "Oh, this is going to kill me in my career. My wife has been telling me this for ages. All her friends think I hate them and I don't hate them." And it was clear that he was not intending to have this impact on people, and he didn't know what to do about it. And as he was talking, I realized that I had been sort of doing to him what I was telling him not to do to others. I was always choosing the negative examples. I was choosing critical feedback. Whereas what I should have done and what I started to do is I said, okay, look, I don't experience you as negative or discouraging. I really enjoy working with you. So I'm going to start pointing out to you all the times when you get it right. And this person, as we worked together and thought about when he got it right, we realized what the issue was, and he was able to resolve it. He thought a big thorny problem was really fun and exciting, and other people didn't have the same response to big thorny problems. So I think that was one of the moments when I realized that praise can be more effective than criticism. Now, there are times when you give people the feedback and nothing changes. And that's when you need to create consequences for this kind of toxic behavior. You need to learn how, especially if you're a leader, you need to learn how to create conversational consequences to interrupt in the moment the bullying and say, look, we've heard a lot from you. Let's hear from everyone in the room. Or, you can't talk to people in this room that way, or something like that. So you need to practice, and it's difficult and it's awkward, but if you're the leader, that's your job. The other thing you need to do as a leader is you need to create compensation consequences. I think very often people on teams who engage in toxic behavior, they get better results for them as individuals, but they hurt the results of the team collectively. And if you're the leader, it's your job not to give that person a high rating and not to pay them a bonus, because behavior that is rewarded in that way is going to escalate. And last but not least, if you're designing a promotion system, or if you're the boss, you better not promote people who engage in that kind of behavior, because there is a moment in the history of every company when the jerks begin to win, and that's the moment when the company's culture begins to lose. So those are a few thoughts, lots more to say about that.
Tara, do you have any follow-up based on the answer that you get to your question? Happy to make it a conversation.
No, that was great. I really appreciated kind of hearing those different types of things that you can interrupt the behavior and the way to redirect. And I think somebody earlier put in the chat kind of a similar question about how to raise up to somebody who may be unaware, right? Just unaware that that's the impression or the imprint they're leaving on the team.
Yeah, if you're not the boss in this situation, it can feel like there's nothing you can do, but it's possible to be an upstander for the person who's being bullied. I think that's really important. In fact, my son was observing some bullying at school. It wasn't directed at him, but it was the kind of thing that made him feel bad for days afterwards, because he hadn't known what to do. And my daughter, at one point, all of this begins sort of in third grade. My daughter was getting bullied at school, and I was advising her, kind of as parents are apt to do, to use an I feel sad when you blah, blah, blah. And she banged her fist on the table and she said, "Mom, they are trying to make me feel sad. Why would I tell them they succeeded?" And I thought, that is a really good point. And so we talked about using a you statement instead. And if an I statement brings the person closer, invites them in to understand things from your perspective, a you statement pushes them away. Or a you question, what's going on for you here right now? Or you can't talk to me like that. Now all of a sudden, you're not on the defense. You're asserting yourself, and that's important, I think, with toxic / bullying behavior.
All right, so thanks, Tara, for the great question. I'm going to give Kim, just a moment to take a look at some of the questions in the Q&A. Kim, you can decide where you want to go next there. I know you've got it going.
Yeah. So many good questions. I've gotten feedback, I tend to be long-winded. So I'm going to try to answer questions quickly. So someone says, what advice do you have for leaders managing a new team that is used to not being performance managed and see feedback as something that is demeaning and making them feel like they are never doing enough? I feel as though my only option is to decimate my team, is to operate with manipulative, not to decimate my team, is to operate with manipulative insincerity. So here is one thing that I recommend. I mentioned this quickly, but I want to go into a little more detail. If you as the leader of that team can think about the times in your life when someone has told you something that stung a little bit in the moment, but stood you in good stead for the next 10 years, like what's your story? And make sure that you make yourself vulnerable when you tell the story. And then make sure that you explain why it was so helpful. And then you can use the Radical Candor framework to explain what's wrong with not doing this, and to explain that as bad as obnoxious aggression can feel, ruinous empathy can leave people as like, I always feel like a dead, not man, I'm going to wave the purple flag since I'm not a man, dead person walking. And so you want to make sure that you are explaining, you're offering some context of why you're going to start doing this. And again, you tell your story, your team will understand better than if you just share a sort of a framework that feels a little bit cold. So illuminate it with your stories. Sometimes we talk in tech land about technical debt. I think very often, sometimes on teams, we have feedback debt. And so talk about this feedback debt, and that you want to start soliciting radical candor and giving it in the spirit of helping everyone grow. The other thing I would say is, for that team, is if you can start with yourself, encourage people, say in general, criticism should happen in private, but with me, I want you all to do it in public. And when you solicit public criticism, then you get an opportunity to show people to lead by example about how to respond. So I hope that helps. And I did not live up to my commitment not to be long-winded.
Come on, don't be hard on yourself.
So someone said, Julia Leonard said, can you give some other examples of questions soliciting feedback? I want to sort of talk about the anatomy of this, of how to solicit feedback. I said it needs to sound like you. It also is important that the question can't be answered with a yes or a no. So if you read the book, you'll notice that I said, is there anything I could do or stop doing that would make it easier to work with me? But I got some feedback on that question, that it would be better to say, what could I do or stop doing? So I offer you that tip. The other thing is, so in addition to making it sound sort of authentic to you, questions that it needs to work for the other person. So I started this company, Radical Candor, with Jason Rosoff. And Jason told me after we had worked together for a little while that he hated my question. And in fact, what he wanted me to say is, I'm working on not interrupting people. In the meeting, how many times did I interrupt you? So he wanted things to be more sort of focused on a particular event. He found the open-ended question too stressful. So you want to make sure it sounds like you. You want to make sure it works for the other person, and you want to make sure that it can't be answered with a yes or a no. So another technique that I would suggest, Julia, is to criticize yourself and then ask someone what their perspective was, because sometimes people feel awkward to come up with the idea, or maybe they just don't have the idea. And so that can help. I know that I want to acknowledge I didn't exactly answer your question, because I think people often want scripts. And if I give folks scripts, then they're going to sound like they read a book and they're putting the ideas in the book. It needs to really sound like you. So I want to acknowledge I didn't exactly answer your question.
I think it's pretty good, personally. I think it's pretty good. I think we have time perhaps for one more question. I know there's a question by Jason that got a lot of +1s.
Okay.
I don't know if you're able to see it, Kim.
I can't. Can you read it?
Yeah, let me see. I may have to scroll up a lot you watch my scrolling face. I don't know if it's better or worse than a resting jerk face. Okay,
There you go.
I didn't have to put on the scrolling face very long. What is an effective question to help raise awareness and personal ownership with someone that wants to place blame externally for their behaviors?
Yes. So one of the things that I have found that is helpful in that kind of situation is to say, look, you cannot control other people. So what I want to focus on with you are the things that are in your control that you can change to lead this to a better place. Because if all the problems are external to you, then you're helpless, and you're not helpless. I want you to feel agency for your career. So that is the kind of conversation that I have found is helpful in that situation. I think that it can be very frustrating to work with someone like that. The other thing that I find helpful in that situation is, let's say the issue is that this person is late, and there's traffic, there's all these reasons why the person is late that have, and so there's in the book Conscious Business, Fred Kaufman talks about sort of player victim. And you got to be careful of this, because when we rolled this out at Google, it got weaponized. By the way, Radical Candor gets all these great ideas get weaponized, and people would like put a V on people's forehead and say victim, victim. And I think we have a problem with the way we think about victimhood in our society. But you want to encourage people to focus on what are the things they could do. So not say I was late because the traffic was terrible, but I was late because I didn't leave enough extra time in case there was traffic or something like that. So working with your team on that can be very helpful. There was another question do you have a better one?
I see one. I don't know if it's better.
Okay.
I won't dare to say that. But one that several people are +1ing right now is from Raji. Can radical candor work with communication upward in your organization as opposed to just your team? Not all execs and C-level folks are open to being challenged directly, and there is oftentimes not much opportunity to establish that you care with such execs. Can we practice radical candor and still retain our job?
Yes, the answer is yes, but I want to acknowledge that there's this fear. In fact, one time I gave a radical candor talk, and someone tweeted at me later, tried radical candor with my boss, got fired. And I was like, oh no, I'm so sorry. I know a lot of people, maybe I can help you. And then he tweeted back, actually, I've already got another job. I'm better off. So I want to acknowledge that there is this fear. It is hard to speak truth to power. However, I will also share with you a story about a friend of mine who worked on Wall Street, and she got a new assignment working for this person who had a reputation as being the biggest jerk on Wall Street, which was saying something, frankly, and given that culture. And she was a little bit nervous about this assignment, and she adopted a mantra, and the mantra was, there is always love, and there is only love. And what she meant by that was she was not going to talk badly about him to anyone behind his back, including even her own husband. Wow. She was only going to give voice to the things that she appreciated. And when she had a problem with the way he was treating her, she would first look for the 5 or 10% in what he said. She would ignore the content. She wouldn't criticize the criticism right away. But she would look for the 5 or 10% of what she could agree with, and she would give voice to that. And then she would go back to him afterwards and say, the way you said that for me made it almost impossible. I was in fight or flight mode. And when my brain is in that mode, I literally can't hear what you're saying. So you're just wasting your breath. You've got to speak to me more respectfully. To be effective, not because I'm human, not because I'm weak or something. And he actually really respected that. So it's not always going to work out that way. I will tell you another thing about being radically candid with your boss, though. The people I have noticed in my career who have done the best consistently get on a level playing field. They don't let hierarchy sort of get in the way of getting on a level playing field at a human level. And it's ideal if your boss has some authority or power that they lay it down so that you can get on but if the world is often not ideal. So you may have to sort of ignore hierarchy a little bit and speak truths of power. Usually, and you can proceed with caution. You can say, there's something that is on my mind, is now a good time. You can you can proceed carefully and gauge how it's landing. But you'll find, I think, 9 times out of 10 that your boss is happy that you're telling them, that they appreciate that you're telling them. And for those 1 times out of 10 when you think you may get punished, locate the exit nearest you, maybe before you have the conversation. Make sure we can often go further faster in our careers when we realize we're not stuck with someone. Does that help? What do you think?
I think it's great. Someone just asked, is there a Radical Candor community of practice? And what we've done is we have created WhatsApp groups in the past.
All right, so you're making the community we're in a garage.
We're building in the garage in the middle of Silicon Valley, okay? So I am going to see how I can, here's a QR code. We'll see if this works. We might break WhatsApp. We often break WhatsApp, but see if you can scan that. If you can scan that QR code or want to take a picture with me smiling, you can join this group. And if you have Candor Conversation, we've got several Masters of Creativity WhatsApp groups. I think they tend to get capped at like 250 or 300 people. So if you don't, get it while it's hot. Get it while it's hot. And we'll see if that works. Let me see if it actually worked. I'm just going to look. Whoa, all of a sudden there's a lot of people in the group.
All right, that is
look
good.
at
Look
that.
at that. That worked.
So,
we're going to break it. We might have to make another.
We don't
community.
promise instantaneous response or anything like that, but we do what we can.
Yeah.
And it's also, I would say the emphasis on a community of practice is the community of practitioners. And so sharing questions, sharing ideas, sharing resources or tactics that you've employed are incredibly helpful. Last thing we want to do as we wrap the session. So first of all, I wish we could go into gallery view. Ordinarily, if it's less than 500 people, we get to see everybody. And we have everyone do what we call fireworks applause. So I'm just going to do it for Kim myself. So we just imagine like 1,000 people doing this right now.
Thank you.
Amazing.